Welcome to the deep dive. Ever hear of a thought becoming, well, almost alive?
Uh-huh.
Today we're plunging into the fascinating ideas of author Mark Stavish. He talks about these things called egregores, and he believes they're a real powerful force.
Yeah, force shaping our world in ways you might not expect.
Exactly.
And we're focusing today on his book, Egregores, the occult entities that watch over human destiny.
Right.
Now, just to be clear, our aim isn't really to prove or disprove any of this.
No, not at all.
Instead, we really want to understand Stavish's perspective, what he thinks these egregores are, how he believes they come into being.
And the kind of influence he suggests they have.
Precisely. We're sticking closely to how he presents these ideas based on his book and summaries and reviews of it.
And that's what makes this a deep dive for you, the listener. You want to grasp the core of an idea, quick but thorough. So we're going to unpack Stavish's intriguing theory, give you the key insights without getting, bogged down.
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's start right at the beginning. In Stavish's view, what is an egregore?
So in Stavish's own words, at its heart, an egregore is an autonomous psychic entity created by a collective group mind.
Okay, let's break that down. Autonomous psychic entity.
Right. Autonomous means it can act somewhat independently.
Okay.
Psychic refers to mental or, energetic. An entity just means something with a distinct existence.
So like a concentration of mental energy, a thought form.
Exactly. Arising from shared mental activity in a group. Often, he mentions this happens with dedicated practitioners, what he calls serious initiates.
So if enough people focus their minds and emotions on the same thing, with the same goal, it can almost solidify.
That's the core idea. And the really crucial part for Stavish is this idea of autonomy.
Acting on its own.
Yeah. He argues that when they get enough sustenance, and this could be belief, repeated rituals, maybe intense devotion, sometimes he calls it sacrifice.
Sustenance, like food for thought, literally.
Sort of. When they get enough, they can actually start to act on their own. It's like they gain their own momentum, maybe even their own agenda.
Wow, that's quite a leap. From shared focus to something with its own being.
It is.
It almost sounds like a character in a shared dream that starts talking back.
That's a really good analogy, actually. Stavish even suggests these. Well-fed egregores can become almost like independent deities.
Deities with their own powers.
That's what he posits. And this is where it gets really interesting, because it starts to blur the lines, between psychology, the power of group belief, and occult metaphysics.
Right. Is it just strong groupthink, or is it something else, some independent energy?
And Stavish definitely leans towards that something else. He seems to think there's a metaphysical reality to them.
Okay. And does he say if they're all the same, or are there different kinds?
The sources we looked at don't give a super detailed breakdown, but he does suggest different types exist. Maybe some are more passive, just reflecting the group's energy. Others might become more active, maybe even influencing the group back.
A two-way street.
Potentially, but maybe even more striking. One review mentions his idea that they aren't just thought blobs.
Go on.
He suggests they could be the home or conduit for a specific psychic intelligence of a non-human nature.
Cool. Okay, so like a vessel.
Yep.
Or a bridge.
Exactly. A bridge connecting what he calls invisible dimensions with our physical world.
So not just human thought creating them, but maybe attracting or hosting other kinds of intelligence. That's deep occult territory.
It really is.
Okay, so if that's what they are,
Yeah.
how does Stavish say they actually come into being? What's the recipe?
Well, Stavish outlines a process that really centers on focus, collective energy, mental, and emotional.
Right.
He points to several key ingredients. First, sustained belief within the group. That's crucial.
Makes sense. You have to believe in it.
Then consistent ritual practices,
Yeah.
things that keep that shared focus alive and, potent. He also mentioned sacrifice, which, like we said, might be symbolic offerings or just really deep devotion to the cause.
The energy you put in.
Exactly. The dedicated focus of the group itself is essential. Could be a small coven, a project team, or even a whole nation united.
Scale doesn't necessarily matter as long as the focus is there.
Seems so. Strong emotions are also key, both in creating it and connecting to it later.
Emotion fuels it.
Yeah. And having a clear symbolic form helps, like a sigil, a logo, a slogan, maybe a diagram like a yantra, something to anchor the energy.
A visual or verbal hook.
Right. And finally, a defined purpose or goal. What's it for?
So it's this potent mix. Intention, belief, emotion, symbols, repeated action, all focused together.
That sums it up pretty well. And Stavish distinguishes between intentional creation.
Like trying to make one on purpose.
Yeah. He thinks ancient cultures did this consciously, like creating guardian spirits for cities in Greece or Rome.
Okay, deliberate creation.
But he also argues they can form unintentionally. When people are collectively focused but don't realize the occult principles involved.
Which brings us to that Arthur Machen story, the Bowmen, during World War I.
Yes, perfect example of what he means by unintentional. Machen wrote this fictional story.
About phantom archers protecting British troops.
Exactly, and it got widely believed as fact. People wanted it to be true, this divine intervention during a terrible crisis.
The collective need was so strong.
Immense. And Stavish argues this powerful surge of shared belief and emotion accidentally created or maybe massively strengthened an egregore linked to St. George, England's patron saint.
Wow, without any magic ritual, just mass belief and feeling.
That's his point. It highlights how potent collective feeling can be. Makes you wonder about modern things, like urban legends or viral trends online, doesn't it?
It really does. Could similar things be happening now, maybe less dramatically?
Stavish would likely say yes.
Okay, so a shared story, even fiction, can have real psychic weight in his view. Once they're created, intentional or not, how do they stick around? What sustains them?
They need ongoing fuel, according to Stavish. Continuous investment.
More belief, more rituals.
Yes. Belief, ritual, sacrifice in its different forms, the devotion of followers. He barely uses an analogy. Think of a high school pep rally.
Okay. Lots of noise, matching colors.
All that collective energy, the enthusiasm, the shared identity, it all feeds the school spirit. You can see that as a kind of simple, maybe localized egregore.
Ah, I see. It needs that constant input.
Right. And if that energy, that focus starts to fade, Stavish suggests the egregore weakens. It might shrink, maybe eventually just dissipate.
Like a plant without water.
Good analogy. Or a fire needing fuel, like you said earlier.
So they exist in this dynamic psychic environment, constantly being fed or maybe fading out.
Exactly. It makes you think about all the collective energies around us, online groups, national identities, fan communities.
So many potential egregores swirling around.
And because they're dynamic, Stavish apparently includes practical advice in his book. How to spot egregores influencing your own life.
Really? How to identify them?
Yeah, maybe in ways you're not even aware of. And he stresses recognizing when one might have become, in his words, parasitic and destructive.
Parasitic, draining you.
Or controlling you unduly. And he even offers methods for, well, dissolving them or destroying them if needed.
Whoa. Destroying them? Like, what? You mentioned therapeutic blasphemy?
Yes, that term definitely stands out.
What does that involve?
Reportedly, things like unbaptisms. Rituals designed to consciously sever ties with a spiritual group whose egregore is seen as harmful.
Actively cutting the connection.
Right. He also mentions using specific prayers or invocations, like invoking Psalm 68, which the esotericist Valentin Tomberg suggested for dismantling unwanted psychic links.
So there are tools, in his view, to fight back if necessary.
That seems to be the implication. This practical side really highlights his belief that we're not just passive victims. We can engage, interact, even break free.
Okay, so they're born from collective energy, need sustenance, can be potentially harmful, but also possibly dismantled. What exactly do they do, though? What's their function, according to Stavish?
Well, he argues they're not just some obscure occult detail. He sees them as fundamental, forming, quote, the foundation of nearly all human interactions.
Wow, that's a huge claim, the foundation of nearly all interactions. How does he figure?
He attributes several key functions. They can be protective, guiding like those ancient city guardians.
Right.
If they get powerful and autonomous, they can be a source of empowerment for believers.
Power flowing back to the group.
Yes. He calls them a synergistic organism, meaning the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. They provide meaning, power, security for those aligned with them.
Like the feeling of belonging in a club, a nation, a fam group.
Exactly that feeling, that sense of shared identity, being part of something bigger. Stavish might say an egregore is helping foster that unity, amplifying the group's energy and impact.
Okay, that makes sense, that powerful feeling of connection. But you said there's a dark side too, parasitic and destructive.
Yes, he really emphasizes this duality. They can offer benefits, but because they can become autonomous, they might also drain energy or exert unhealthy control.
So a potential downside to that belonging.
A serious one. Stavish warns about losing individual freedom, becoming sort of enslaved by this collective thought creation. He even points to Valentin Tomberg's take on the tarot's devil card.
The devil card, how does that relate?
Tomberg apparently saw it as symbolizing exactly this: being trapped by the very structures, the very egregores we helped create.
So that feeling of belonging turns into a kind of psychic cage if you're not careful.
That's the danger he highlights.
Yeah.
And a key way they exert negative influence, he says, is by controlling the narrative, imposing what he calls correct pre-filters on members' thinking.
Pre-filters, like mental blinders.
Sort of. They subtly shape how you see things, discourage independent or dissenting thoughts, ensure everyone stays within the group's accepted beliefs.
That sounds familiar in many group dynamics, even without invoking the occult.
Absolutely. And that inherent duality is why Stavish stresses awareness. When you engage with any collective, a nation, religion, party, company, fan club, there's potentially an egregore influencing things, for better or worse.
This seems incredibly relevant today, with online echo chambers and intense group identities.
Very much so.
Okay, so if they're this fundamental and pervasive, Stavish must offer some historical examples, right?
Right.
Where does he see them showing up?
Oh, yes. He draws on a really wide range of examples, historical, cultural, even literary, to argue that this idea isn't new or niche. It's universal and ancient, often just called different things.
Like the Greek and Roman city guardians we keep mentioning.
Exactly. He suggests that was a conscious, deliberate practice back then, creating these entities for protection.
Right.
He also brings in Julius Evola's perspective, which is quite provocative.
Evola, the traditionalist writer.
Yes. Evola apparently speculated about the revival of the ancient Roman egregore during Mussolini's fascist regime in Italy.
Seriously, linking fascism to an ancient Roman egregore.
Stavish presents Evola's view, yes, suggesting a direct link between this occult concept and major 20th century political events. It definitely makes you look at history differently.
It certainly does. That's a very bold connection.
It is, and it really shows how seriously Stavish takes their potential influence on world affairs. He also traces the concept through Western mystery tradition.
Such as?
Things like the ancient Hermetic texts, the Corpus Hermeticum, groups like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn.
A famous magical order.
Right. Rosicrucian groups like AMRRC, Martinism, highlighting that these esoteric streams understood and worked with these concepts.
So it wasn't just ancient politics, but also central to Western magic.
He argues it was. And he looks east, too, drawing parallels with Tibetan Buddhism, the idea of tulpas, which are mind-created forms.
Ah, tulpas, yes. I've heard of those.
And he mentions possible connections in Islamic mysticism as well, trying to show this isn't just a Western thing.
So he's building a case for universality. This pattern of collective thought creating something appears across cultures and history.
That's the goal, it seems. And he doesn't stop in the past or just with spiritual groups. He looks at modern examples, too.
Like what?
He discusses the Lovecraft Circle, H.P. Lovecraft, and the writers he corresponded with.
The horror writers.
Yeah. He suggests their intense shared focus on that fictional Cthulhu mythos might have generated powerful thought forms related to it. Maybe even ones that took on a life of their own in readers' minds.
The power of shared imagination, creating something psychically real.
That's the implication. He also mentions other occultists, Kenneth Grant, Aleister Crowley, Evola again.
Evola again.
Yeah, there's an anecdote Stavish apparently relates about Evola finding a fascist symbol, the Roman power symbol used by the fascists by chance just before Mussolini rose. Stavish might see that as a sign of the Roman egregore stirring.
Interpreting coincidence through an occult lens.
Seems like it. And, of course, he comes back to Macon's The Bowman as a key modern example of unintentional creation, fueled by wartime emotion. He also references other thinkers who touched on similar ideas, like Tomberg again and Gary Lachman.
So he's weaving together history, magic, literature, politics, personal stories.
To build this intricate case, arguing for the reality and ongoing presence of egregores in human life.
Okay, so we have the what, the how, the function, the examples. Let's get to the real core of his argument. The connection between egregores, our own consciousness, and the influence they supposedly have.
Right. This is really his central thesis. Stavish argues there's this deep, inseparable link between human consciousness and egregores.
How so?
He believes they literally arise from our collective thoughts, shared beliefs, common imagination, focused psychic activity. He sees our physical world as interwoven with this higher realm of collective thought and spirit.
And egregores are the bridge.
They're key intermediaries in his framework, bridging those realms. So in a way, our thoughts actually help build the psychic landscape around us.
So our collective minds literally give them form and power in his view.
That's the fundamental idea. And crucially, once formed, they're not just passive. Stavish believes they influence us back. Reciprocal influence.
How do they influence us?
He argues they actively shape our thoughts, feelings, even our basic perceptions. Remember those mental pre-filters we mentioned?
Right, like blinders or colored glasses.
Exactly. Imposed by the egregore, especially if you're strongly connected to its group, they subtly guide how you interpret everything, making certain views seem natural and others unthinkable.
That sounds potentially quite controlling.
It can be. And on a larger scale, he sees them as vital for shaping group identity, shared purpose, collective energy in nations, religions, organizations, you name it.
And this is where the Mussolini example fits again, showing large-scale historical impact.
He uses it as a prime illustration, yes. How these collective energies born from history and aspiration might align with and empower political movements. But he also argues that today, their influence is amplified because they've moved into popular culture and media.
Amplified by media? How?
It creates this powerful feedback loop. Media shapes our collective consciousness, right? Which generates and strengthens egregores related to those media narratives. Those egregores then reinforce the beliefs, making the egregore even stronger.
A self-perpetuating cycle fueled by media consumption.
Exactly. So the stories we tell, the dominant cultural narratives, the stuff we see online, it's not just passive info or entertainment for Stavish.
It's actively shaping these psychic entities.
Which then shape us back, influencing our beliefs and perceptions.
That's a major implication for how we understand culture and society.
It is. He argues that our culture, our social structures, the accepted truths, they're partly co-created and maintained by these often unseen psychic forces born from collective thought.
Which is why he stresses being selective about information.
Precisely. Intense selectivity, he calls it, especially with media's pervasive influence shaping that collective consciousness which feeds the egregores.
Okay, so it seems Stavish sees egregores not as some weird footnote, but as a core force shaping reality individually and collectively. So, pulling it all together, what are his final conclusions about egregores and human destiny?
His bottom line is that they're not minor esoteric details. They are absolutely central, fundamental to the human condition. He sees them as these powerful energy complexes that have been with humanity since the beginning, forming that foundation of nearly all human interactions he talks about.
And the book title, The Occult Entities That Watch Over Human Destiny, he really means that. They steer our collective fate.
That's the implication. He argues their influence goes beyond just psychology or sociology. There's a real metaphysical, occult dimension where these beings exert significant force on history, civilization, our overall trajectory. Active players, not just reflections.
That sounds almost deterministic, like we're puppets.
But that's where it gets nuanced. Even with that heavy conclusion, he also suggests we're not entirely helpless.
How so? We have agency.
Yes, that seems crucial to his view. While they watch over destiny, the fact that he includes methods for identifying them, freeing ourselves, even destroying them.
Right, the therapeutic blasphemy and stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That strongly suggests we're not just passive. Destiny isn't totally fixed by them. It's more like a negotiation. Heavily influenced, yes, but open to change through our awareness and conscious action.
So awareness is step one, the absolute key.
Seems to be. Just knowing these forces might be operating is the first defense against being unknowingly controlled.
And that leads to being selective.
Exactly. Conscious awareness, then intense selectivity about beliefs and information. He believes understanding egregores fundamentally changes how you see the world and your place in it.
Okay.
Ultimately, he suggests conscious interaction aligning with helpful ones, resisting harmful ones, just navigating their presence is crucial for understanding and maybe even influencing our personal and collective destiny.
Wow. Okay. That is definitely a lot to chew on. So just to quickly recap Mark Stavish's perspective as we've unpacked it, egregores.
Yeah.
Autonomous psychic entities born from collective thought and emotion.
Right.
Sustained by ongoing belief and ritual.
Yep.
Capable of wielding significant influence, good or bad, throughout history and today.
Correct.
And his main point, awareness of these forces is essential for understanding ourselves and where humanity might be headed.
That's a great summary. He's basically saying this isn't just some fringe occult idea, but a fundamental layer of reality actively shaping our thoughts, societies, history in ways we're often unaware of.
So for you, the listener, maybe something to think about as you go about your day.
Yeah.
What collective group minds are you part of, consciously or maybe unconsciously? And following Stavish's ideas, what kind of egregores might be subtly nudging your thoughts, your feelings, your actions?
Could be online groups, work teams, political affiliations.
Even close friends or family with strong shared beliefs. It's definitely worth reflecting on the info you consume, the beliefs you hold dear.
And maybe asking if unseen collective energies might be shaping your perspective.
Absolutely. And Stavish's framework, as we've explored it, really does offer a unique lens.
Yeah, it's not just for understanding occult stuff. It could apply to broader social, cultural, even political dynamics we see every day.
It invites you to think about those energetic undercurrents of collective belief.
And how they might manifest in real, tangible ways we don't always recognize.
Definitely gives you a lot to ponder. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.
My pleasure.
Until our next exploration.